Alleluia, Christ is risen.
The Lord is risen indeed. Alleluia.
I'm here with my new friend Brad, and we're going to be talking about joy in Psalm 30 today. So, Brad, Psalm 30 is kind of resurrection psalm, but it wasn't originally written like that. So when you read it, how do we kind of see Easter in this psalm?
When I read Psalm 30, all I hear is the echo of the resurrection, the language of going down and coming up, of the grave and the pit, and of the soul of the psalmist being raised to life through Christian eyes or through a Christian lens. Resurrection is sort of all I can hear.
And that's not just because the little line underneath Psalm 30 says, thanksgiving for recovery from grave illness.
Grave illness, yes.
So you kind of have a resurrection line leading you into the psalm
That's
from
right.
the beginning.
So one of the things we were talking about a moment ago was the Psalms both point towards Christ and Christ points back to the Psalms. So we know that Jesus, as a faithful Jew, was raised on the Psalms. I'm sure he was memorizing them from an early age. These were things he could bring to the tip of his lips at any moment. And at the same time, we know that Jesus, as God incarnate, is the author and source and original voice of the Psalms. And so we're right to hear his voice and to see in the Psalms the arc of Christ's career, especially in the Passion and on the cross, and of course, Easter Sunday, because he's both the source and the one who fulfills them in his own flesh and blood. And so the church has always read this psalm as testifying in advance to the resurrection of Jesus from the dead.
Right. And you can see that kind of from the very beginning. You didn't let my foes rejoice over me. You've drawn me up out of the grave. And that kind of continues throughout the psalm. I wonder about how then we take this psalm and turn it into a prayer that we can pray. How does that work?
Yeah, I think at least one way is this psalm, like so much, not just of the Psalter, but of the whole scriptures, is a response to God's action on our behalf. And even though God is worthy of our worship just for who he is, because he's God, he's worthy of our love and devotion regardless of what he does. As a matter of fact, he does 10,000 things for us. All of his graces and gifts and blessings are the occasion for us to respond with praise. And this psalm models that because you and I haven't died yet, but we have experienced the hills and valleys of life where maybe we have been ill, or someone we know has been ill, or we've lost a job, or we've lost or suffered in some way. And the words of this psalm are meant for us to put on our own lips and to give God praise wherever we are in our life.
Right. Yeah, one of the things that stood out to me as we were looking through this psalm is that it's not like none of those things have happened. So it's not as if after resurrection we forget that death has occurred. It's not as if after Easter Sunday we no longer celebrate Good Friday anymore. Yeah. And so even the way that this psalm is kind of divvied up in our translation, you have 5 sections, and within these sections there is both death and resurrection. And we kind of get these layers of this repetition that within this life there will be both. And that's kind of what we've been doing these past weeks as we've looked through the different psalms is, you know, we see a psalm where there is really raw anger or kind of complete loneliness and lament, and mixed in that is praise.
Yeah.
And that's what our human lives look like.
Yeah.
But we are always kind of looking forward to the ultimate resurrection. We're looking forward to Jesus coming back again.
Yeah, as you say that, it makes me think, again, of 2 directions. So one is that Jesus still bears scars on his hands. So he, as the risen one, is the one who was crucified. So he's also the crucified, even as he's the one who was raised from the dead. And at the same time, for us, as we go through those hills and valleys, as we suffer, we both retain the memory, as Jesus retained the scars, we retain the memory of the things we've suffered. And at the same time, we, even in the lowest moments, we can put these words on our lips and we can cry out with joy. I mean, so I imagine, I haven't been part of the Lenten series, but I imagine, part of the Psalms of suffering, let's say, are about recognizing that life with God is not a honeymoon.
Yes.
But at the same time, we actually need, in times of grief and suffering, to have joy. And it's not so much that God is commanding us to feel something.
Right.
He's offering us an occasion, a moment to give thanks to the God we know loves us, even if we aren't feeling that in our hearts at that moment.
Yeah, and in order to feel joy, you don't have to do away with any other feeling that you've had.
Right.
I think that's part of pastorally, as we have gone through this series, I want people to feel like they can have honest prayers, and honest prayers include that mix.
Our circumstances are not in our control, but they don't have to be in charge of our relationship to God or how we feel. We actually can know deep joy even when our conditions, our external conditions around us, what we're going through, would not suggest to someone on the outside that we can have access to this kind of peace or joy or contentment.
Yeah, I think about when I'm with somebody who is in grief, or when I have been in grief, I often just want someone to say, there are no words. And I've done that. I usually, if I write a card or if I'm in that situation with someone in a conversation, I'll say, there's nothing that I have to say about this. Yeah. And I remember saying that to a mentor of mine, and she said, that's not true. We actually do have something to say. We have Jesus Christ, and we have his resurrection, and that means that death is not the end. That means that this is not only going to be suffering. Yeah. This means that we can say with the psalmist, "O Lord my God, I will give thanks to you forever." And that's where we're always heading.
Yeah.
One of the other things that you brought up when we were kind of mapping out what we wanted to talk about was that praise is always a response to God's action, but it's not something that we do alone. Yeah. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, there's this wonderful moment when the psalmist says, not to God, he says, "Sing praises to the Lord, O you his faithful ones, and give thanks to his holy name." So we don't want to imagine an individual alone in a room, alone with himself, but rather he's giving thanks in the congregation, which is a word the psalm uses, but in church, let's say, in the synagogue, in the company of the saints. He's with sisters and brothers. He's with God's people, and he's, in a sense, testifying to the work of God in his life. And then he's not just looking upward, he's looking outward and saying, with me, join your voice to mine, and let's give thanks with one voice to God for what he has done for me. And it's a reminder that, I think the songs that we sing on Sunday morning are just like the Psalms, in that some are first person I, and some are, some are first person singular, and some are first person plural. But the I is never alone. So even when it's an I, and it seems like a pretty lonely I, the I is located in this larger we, and God here has done something for this one person, but it's a moment for the whole people of God to pause, to look and to listen, and then to give praise to God for what he's done.
Well, and that's something that we talk, I don't know if we've talked about it in this video, but so often we need somebody else to sing praises when we can't. Yeah. And that's one of the gifts of going to church, when you recite the creed and your voice kind of chokes because you're having a hard time with your belief, or you're just in that time of despair, or whatever the case might be, and someone fills in that gap for you. And it also makes me think about a theologian named Paul Griffiths has this really beautiful kind of imaginative exercise of what heaven might look like, and he talks about it being like a choir and the harmony of voices coming together, and that there's something very beautiful in a soloist singing, but when you add the richness of all of those harmonies coming together and all of those voices singing together, that's what we want to offer God together.
So I was raised in an a cappella
Interesting.
tradition of church and worship. And in an a cappella tradition, everybody's got to sing or nobody's going to sing. It was a new experience for me to attend a church where not every single soul, old and young, male and female, was singing. And you get this experience where you have these harmonies and these moments where everybody is belting out all the components of the choir, so to speak, but the choir is not facing us on the stage. The choir is us, and it's surrounding us. And I think that's really what we get in the Psalms. We get it in the liturgy, and we get it, I'm going to say it one more time, in both directions. Meaning, when I'm doubting or despairing, someone else's faith steps in for me. But also, when my faith is strong and my circumstances are great, and I'm right with God, at least I feel right with God, I'm not in the valley, I need to be reminded that there are people in the valley. And so I need all 150 Psalms to also remind me that even if I am on my proverbial honeymoon with Christ, it's not always like that before or after, just as those who are in the valley need to hear me singing loudly and proudly and joyfully and without any kind of asterisk next to what I'm saying.
Yeah, and I think to kind of wrap us up and land us, one of those voices that we join to is Christ's.
Yeah.
And so it's this whole communion of saints, and it is the bridegroom that is Jesus who is singing with his bride. And we get to join him in singing a song of praise of his resurrection. We get to join him in his death, knowing that he has suffered what we have suffered. And we look ahead to that kind of ultimate resurrection.
Yeah, I think you could think of this psalm, if you think of faith, hope, and love as the three great theological virtues. This psalm is about hope. And on the one hand, it is a psalm for us to sing every day of our lives, wherever we are, because God has, in fact, brought up our souls from the grave, the place of the dead. We were dead, as Paul says in Ephesians 1 and 2, and God has raised us up with Christ into the heavenly places. Even now, in a sense, by the Spirit, we are there with him. But of course, we look down and see our mortal bodies, and we don't see that at present. And so ultimately, this is a psalm we sing now in anticipation of being able to unite our voices to Christ's own song of deliverance and joy and praise when we too, like him, share his fate and are on the far side of death.
And that's when mourning turns into dancing. That's when sackcloth is replaced with being clothed with joy, which is a really beautiful, beautiful image.
Yeah.
Yeah. So kind of as you go out and into this Easter season, may you hold on to not just the gift of Good Friday and the gift of Easter Sunday, but also that hope of resurrection, of being clothed one day with joy, with joining your brothers and sisters in heaven in that heavenly choir. It's something to look forward to. So thank you, Brad, and thank you for joining us.